Now we're going to look at a second form of cell division that's essential for reproduction of whole organisms. This is a process called meiosis. Now, chromosomes are passed on to daughter cells at cell division. We've already seen binary fission, mitosis. That's either bacterial reproduction, or in eukaryotes, that's growth, particularly in early embryos, cell division, each with the identical genetic material of the original. Now we're going to go to meiosis. Meiosis is going to produce haploid daughter cells from a diploid original. And this is what happens in the production of germ cells in multicellular organisms. So this is where eggs and sperm come from and how they are fundamentally different from all other cells in the body. But wait, we're talking about reproduction all of a sudden. We were doing cells, now we're doing whole individuals. So where do babies come from? You've had the talk by now, right? I mean, we know that boys and girls have to get together to make babies, right? But there's been some bizarre ideas about what actually happens at what would ultimately be the genetic level in the process of reproduction. Going back to one of our founders of biology, Aristotle, he suggested that semen caused menstrual blood to coagulate like cheese within the uterus, okay? So there is a picture of a woman's womb, and presumably that's some sort of cheese in there that somehow gets transformed into a baby, okay? Pretty creepy, strange idea, but it was believed by Western societies for 1,000 years that that's where babies came from. Well, it wasn't until much later, the 1600s, when we have this guy, von Leeuwenhoek, who was able to look very carefully at the germ cells and could see what was actually happening at the cellular level. So the father of microbiology, von Leeuwenhoek, was the first person to see single-celled organisms. He was the first person to realize there even was such a thing as single-celled organisms like protists and bacteria. And he had this extraordinary advanced technical tool, his microscope, that could enlarge things 500 times, pretty good for something so small. And he was the first person to see sperm, okay? So if you look at sperm through there, interesting structure, okay? Now, he thought he saw in the semen, quote, all manner of great and small vessels, so various and so numerous that I do not doubt that they be nerves, arteries, and veins. He somehow sees all of that in there. That's pretty amazing. So these early microscopists were only able to see things fairly crudely, and they imagined that they were seeing some pretty complex things inside the head of a sperm, okay? So here's somebody who thinks he sees tiny little people in sperms. Here's one that has an angel in the sperm. Here's an extraordinary thing inside of a sperm, okay? This is what people thought quite consistently all through the late 1600s. So with their limited view of sperm and eggs, 17th century biologists were what we now call preformationists, okay? They thought that inheritance worked like this, that all organisms were created at once, so succeeding generations grow from miniature versions of themselves that existed since the beginning, okay? So this guy is not unique to the dad, but was been passed on from the dad, got it from somewhere even before that, okay? So all the way back to the beginning of creation, and literally that's what people thought in the 17th century. If that's so, where would we have been all that time, okay? And there was a whole school of thought. They were called the spermists. And they were convinced that we all swam in Adam's testicles, okay? And that somehow all subsequent generations were passed on generation after generation within the sperms of the male line, okay? Kind of like these Russian dolls fitting inside each other. And then on the other hand, there was a heated debate with people who said, no, it's not the men who are responsible, it's the women, okay? So these are called ovists. And they said that we were all packed in Eve's ovaries. Eve's ovaries contained enough of these things that eventually would emerge fully grown as us, many, many generations down the line. Okay, so those are pretty crazy, right, by modern standards. So seriously, where do babies really come from? What we now have that dates from the 19th century is called cell theory. And this is that the male and female each contribute a single germ cell that will merge to form the next generation. So this is schematically presented here in a generalized animal life cycle. So we'll follow the history of an elephant. Okay, so you have elephant males that produce sperm, elephant females that produce eggs. Eggs and sperm fuse at fertilization. Then there's mitosis, generating all those identical daughter cells. Then they grow up into the next generation of adult elephants. But the key thing here is that the germ cells are said to be haploid, whereas the adults are said to be diploid. So at fusion of gametes, we have a diploid, and it has 2 copies of each chromosome. So there's 2 copies of chromosome number 1. There's 2 copies of chromosome number 2. Then at meiosis, half of those are discarded, and so we have a haploid cell that has just 1 copy of each chromosome. So let's look at a human. It's called karyotype. This is the characterization of the chromosomes. So we have 2 chromosomes number 1, 2 of the second chromosome, 2 of the third chromosome, all the way out. Okay? So we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and they're called homologous pairs because they're the same size and they have the same sequence of Gattaca, 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 roughly, to code for the same proteins. Okay? So chromosome number 1 has the genes that code for certain traits. Chromosome number 9, either copy of these have the genes that code for a separate set of traits. Okay? So we have 22 pairs of chromosomes that are essentially identical, and then in mammals, humans have what are called sex chromosomes. So women have 2 X chromosomes and men have 1 X and 1 Y. So now let's look at meiosis. We're going to go from a diploid adult to the production of these germ cells of eggs and sperm. Now, 1 diploid cell is going to produce 4 haploid cells, and the end product each has half the chromosomes of the original. Now, these are not a random selection of any 23 of these chromosomes, but 1 member of each homologous pair. So here's some photographs. This is a locust. It's a large grasshopper type thing. These are photographs of the different phases of meiosis. We're going to start diploid and we're going to end up with haploid. So we start out with the DNA being replicated, and then something special happens in meiosis that didn't happen in mitosis, so that the homologous partners are going to line up. And they're somewhere in these sequences. I don't really care. We'll see this in the resultant cartoons. But the point is that this is going to be a series of phases. Again, you don't need to know the names of the phases, where we're going to have first DNA replication, so we have sister chromatids. Then the sister chromatids are going to come together, perhaps that's here somewhere, and then they're all treated in a very special way that we're going to separate those out in a very precise way so that we end up with haploid sperm. Okay, so let's look at an adult diploid cell. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow what happens through various aspects of meiosis. So first recall that all of our chromosomes come in pairs. Okay, so these are the homologous partners or homologous chromosomes. And so let's say this is chromosome number 1, and we have 1 chromosome number 1 that we got from mom and the other one that comes from dad. Okay? And so the reason they're said to be homologous is they code for the same traits. So around this region of this particular stretch of DNA, which is this chromosome number 1, there is a gene that codes for eye color. Further down, there is another region, a gene that codes for hair color. Okay? So this one will code for blue eyes and brown hair coming from one parent, but the other parent's chromosome may be slightly different. Although it also codes for blue eyes here in eye color, it may code for a different color of hair. And we then refer to these different forms as alleles. Okay? So there are 2 different alleles here, one that codes for brown coming from one parent, the other codes for red coming from the other parent. And so alleles then are alternative forms of the same gene that both code for the same trait but different nucleotide sequence. So the Gattaca along here is different from the Gattaca from here, yet the proteins that are ultimately produced both affect the same trait, which is hair color. Okay, so what we want to do now is allow for DNA replication. So if we have DNA replication, the first thing that we'll see is that now this homologous partner has produced sibling chromatids, okay? So this is one of these chromosomes after DNA replication, and so we have sister chromatids here, okay? So each one is identical. Now, what happens in meiosis is the homologous partners find each other. So those sister chromatids, both sister chromatids for chromosome number 1, they find each other and they line up. And so now this is all together, it's called a tetrad. So here's the sister chromatids. It might have been dad's chromosome number 1, and here's mom's chromosome number 1, also in sister chromatids. So now there's 4 DNA strands down here that are lining up together at this beginning step in meiosis. Okay? So, the key thing about meiosis that wasn't going on in mitosis at all is how the homologous partners find each other. So in this case, we have the long chromosome pair and the short chromosome pair. Each chromosome has undergone DNA replication, so there's now sister chromatids for here, sister chromatids here. Okay, they find their homologous partner, long chromosome with long chromosome, short chromosome with short chromosome. They line up, and then they're going to be separated precisely so that you get one sister chromatid in the daughter cell and then the other sister chromatid in a different cell. Okay? And then the next step after that is that the sister chromatids are going to line up. This is now like mitosis, and they're going to separate. So the sister chromatids are separated. And now we have haploids, so there's just one copy, whereas before there were 2. There were 2 long ones here, one from mom, one from dad in long. Now there's just a single one in the descendant cell. So meiosis takes 2 cell divisions. The first cell division separates the tetrad, and the second cell division separates the sister chromatids. And so then you get a complete complement of chromosomes, but just a single haploid set in each one of these 4 descendant cells after 2 cell divisions. So meiosis, 2 cell divisions. First, the homologous partners are going to be separated, and then the sister chromatids are going to be separated. We'll watch this in this video.
Meiosis is the process by which a diploid nucleus divides twice to produce 4 haploid nuclei. The divisions are called meiosis I and meiosis II. In the life cycles of diploid organisms, meiosis precedes sexual reproduction. Among animals, the products of meiosis are gametes, eggs or sperm. DNA is replicated prior to the start of meiosis. The identical sister chromatids are joined at the centromere, as in mitosis. Unlike in mitosis, homologous chromosomes pair with one another. These pairs intertwine during early prophase of the first meiotic division, and may exchange segments. This exchange is called crossing over. During prophase I, the nuclear envelope disappears, and the spindle forms. The homologous pairs lie side by side as they reach the midplane of the spindle and attach to spindle fibers in metaphase I. Metaphase ends and anaphase I begins as the partners in each pair of homologous chromosomes separate as they are pulled toward opposite poles of the spindle. These chromosomes still consist of sister chromatids joined at their centromeres. During telophase I, the spindle disappears. Nuclear membranes may reform, and the 2 nuclei, each containing a haploid set of chromosomes, are separated as cytokinesis divides the cytoplasm. Prophase II begins with the formation of a spindle, and the still duplicated chromosomes move toward its midplane. At metaphase 2, they are lined up and attached to spindle fibers. Anaphase 2 begins when centromeres separate and sister chromatids, now considered chromosomes, begin moving in opposite directions. During telophase 2, the nuclear membrane reforms, the spindle disappears, and cytokinesis divides the cytoplasm. The result is 4 haploid cells.
Here we have another view. And so again, we're getting our tetrads, they're separating into sister chromatids. The sister chromatids are separated. So after 2 cell divisions, then we get 4 haploid cells from 1 original diploid. So first, the homologous partners are separated, the tetrad is broken up, but they're still each one in a sister chromatid pair, but then those sister chromatids are separated in the second cell division, and we go then from diploid to haploid. So the key thing here is in looking at the difference between mitosis and meiosis. In mitosis, the only thing that happens is DNA replication, sister chromatids lining up, and then being separated. That's it. There's a complete set of all the chromosomes in the diploid state in both daughter cells. In meiosis, we have the homologous partners forming the tetrad, and then the tetrad is split up, but the sister chromatids are still together. Then in the second cell division in meiosis, the sister chromatids line up, and then they're separated, and we end up with 4 haploid cells. Now, there is a difference in the way that meiosis occurs during the life history of each sex. Sperm are haploid cells, and these are produced throughout a man's life. There are certain cells in the testicles that are capable of producing sperm. And so you have these things called spermatogonium. Again, you don't need to know the names, but they then proliferate, that is, they divide rapidly through mitosis. There's a lot of descendant cells, and then some of these then eventually go through the first phase of meiosis, and so they then become spermatocytes, and then the spermatocytes then divide again to form spermatids, and then the spermatids are given tails and sent on their merry way, and those are sperm, okay? This is happening throughout a man's life. In contrast, in women, meiosis is a very different kind of process in that the female has a fixed number of oocytes, and these are all in the developing fetus's body after only a few months in early development. And these oocytes remain in an arrested phase of meiosis until ovulation, so well after the girl is born, becomes a teenager and an adult, etc. So you have these oocytes that are waiting for a woman to have her period, and during her then ovulation, a single oocyte is released, and the first meiotic division is completed, and then somewhere along further is the second meiotic division. And so in women, there's only 1 egg produced from 1 oocyte. And there's a limited number of oocytes that she's born with. She releases 1 at a time as she cycles. So 1 egg is produced from each oocyte. So if we revisit this, we have now our process from meiosis, where we go from diploid cells to haploid cells. So there's a complete half set of chromosomes waiting for the homologous partners, which will then be produced at fertilization. So we go from haploid back to the diploid state. So 2 copies of chromosome number 1, 2 copies of chromosome number 2, etc., all the way along as the diploid state is restored. And then we have mitosis that allows the growth of the developing embryo, diploid to diploid to diploid. As an adult, then only certain cells are susceptible to meiosis to produce sperm in men and eggs in women. So putting all this in explicit human terms, if a woman ovulates and produces then an egg, the egg has the haploid genome, so there's one of each chromosome pair. And if she then is in a committed long-term relationship with some lucky wizard, his sperm likewise will be haploid, and he'll have one chromosome number 1 all the way down through here, okay? And then they'll have an offspring, which will be the restored state of the diploid. So there'll be 2 copies of chromosome number 1. Those are the homologous partners of chromosome number 1 through 22. And if they have a daughter, there'll be 2 copies of the X chromosome. And that, children, is where babies come from. Meiosis is essential for that whole process.